Hello, my quilting friends. My name is Leah Day, and welcome to this machine embroidery tutorial. So I have all of the designs for the Chakra wall hanging, and that's a tutorial I shared several years ago, but I want to update it, give you a few more designs to play with, and teach you a new quilt-as-you-go technique for connecting your blocks together. So let's make a new Chakra wall hanging quilt today. So let's get hooping. The very first step is to loosen the screw on your hoop and grab a piece of stabilizer. We're using stabilizer for the back of these squares instead of fabric, and that's going to make it come together just a little bit differently than the other version of the Chakra wall hanging. So this is a tearaway stabilizer. It does have fusible on one side, but that's really optional. You don't have to have fusible on that wrong side if that's not what you have on hand. And this is just a lightweight fusible interfacing. Okay, so now I'm just going to hoop this and tighten this screw. And I do find that this is sometimes easier to do off the table. Just kind of slide it over and screw that in. And the nice thing is, once you get this tightened up and set, you really only have to do this one time, and then pretty much for all the other hoopings, you should have the same tension on the hoop consistently. So here, I'm going to just tighten that up till it's nice and tight. Now I'm going to pop that top of the hoop out and loosen that just a little bit. Doesn't need to be that tight. There we go. I'm going to pop the top of that hoop out, center that back up again, and squish it back down again. And tearaway stabilizer is just a little bit less durable than your cutaway stabilizer, so try not to be too aggressive with this. Mostly that is just making sure that that's hooped nice and tight and the stabilizer is flat across the hoop. That looks great. Okay, now let's do our stack. All we're going to do is take a piece of thin, this is 100% polyester batting, but you could use cotton if you prefer that. And that's just about a 7-inch square. Now I have about a 10-inch square of purple fabric, and we are going to be working on the purple chakra today. So there we go. That is our stack. Our hoop is ready to go. We've got tearaway stabilizer hooped. We've got a piece of batting floating in the center and a piece of fabric floating on top. So this is ready to go. Let's take it to the machine and begin stitching. So I'm going to slide the hoop into the machine and get it locked into place. There we go. And now I'm going to select my design. For the purple chakra, I've decided to use sand dollar. So I just select that design. It tells me what hoop to use. Always double check that that is the hoop that you are using. And I know it is, but it's always good to double check yourself just in case you accidentally end up with a design that is bigger than you expected. Okay, so I have selected a basting stitch. This is just one of those things that I think is a good habit to get into if your machine has this stitch function. And I hang on to the thread as it begins stitching. And what this does is it basically bastes those layers together. It's a nice little line of stitching all the way around. So that way the layers aren't going to shift as the sand dollar design gets stitched. So there we go. It's going to go all the way around and then tie off and break itself right at the end. So I'll clip off that loose thread just so it doesn't get in the way. And now let's X out of the basting stitch and we're ready to go. I'm going to again hang on to that thread. I'm doing this so that way the thread doesn't get sucked into the middle of the machine. And I'm going to let it stitch a little ways away, and then I'm going to clip that thread off. So let's see, maybe if it stitches out, yeah, I think I can get far enough away right there that I can clip that thread off. You don't want to do that clipping while the machine is running. Always make sure to use your start-stop button to turn the machine off before you clip your threads. And now I'm just going to let it stitch out. It's as easy as that, and that's exactly how I stitched out all of the squares for my chakra wall hanging. So here is the last design for the chakra wall hanging. I stitched out on white fabric, and this is Delicate Petal Flower. I love how that turned out, and that's the perfect choice for the crown chakra. And so I'm just removing this basting stitch. And if your machine doesn't have the basting stitch function, or you don't have big enough hoops in order to do that, please don't worry. It's not a big deal, and you can absolutely still make this project even if you can't do that line of basting. Just keep an eye on your block as the design starts to stitch out. Make sure that those layers don't shift. Okay, so now I'm going to tear away all of this tearaway stabilizer from the back. And I just want to get close to that outer stitching. And all of the designs stitch a box around the design, and that provides a nice little outline for the design. So it's always going to look nicely finished. And this is good because we can always we can make our project a little bit bigger by leaving some open space here with just the batting and the fabric. Okay, so this was tearaway stabilizer. I want you to understand that if you don't like the idea of using stabilizer on the back, it's fine to hoop fabric too, but understand that this side is going to be completely covered up by another layer of fabric. Okay, I'm going to flip it over, and now we're going to trim it down. And I'm going to trim these squares to 5.5 inches square. And what I want to look at is, here's 5.5 inches. The square is roughly 4 inches. It's a little bit less than 4 inches, so it can fit in the smallest hoops. So I really want to look at these notches that are 3/4 of an inch from the outside of the ruler and that 5.5 inch mark. So I'm looking at those marks there and just centering that up in the ruler. And I'm left-handed, so I'm going to cut the left side, rotate it around, line up my ruler again, and now because I have a cut line, I'm going to line up a thin line on the ruler here and kind of center up that square in the middle again. And you could be creative with this. You could make it intentionally wonky. You could definitely play with putting the blocks in bigger squares of fabric with more batting and then cutting them asymmetrically. That would be a lot of fun. So definitely feel like you can experiment and try different things with this. Okay, so now I've cut two sides, so I'm lining up the 5.5 inch mark over here and down here. Press firmly and cut. And I know it's so tempting. You've got everything lined up. It's all perfect. It's so tempting to cut across. I really cut myself badly once doing that, so please don't do that. It will hurt and take a long time to heal if you cut the tip of your finger off, I promise. That happened to me and it wasn't any fun. It was about a month or so before my finger felt right again. So now how do we put these together? I'm going to start with that top square, that's the white one, and top it with the purple square, and we're going to go right sides together with these embroideries. Now I'm going to pick it up and I'm going to pull that batting away from both sides. We don't want to catch the batting in the seam. So I'm just going to pull that away and line up these edges real nicely together. So now I'm going to take this to my machine and I'm going to stitch along this edge, stitching the two fabrics together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I went on ahead and lined up all of my pieces and pieced them together just exactly like that. I pulled away the batting and stitched just the surface fabric together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So now here's what we're going to do in order to take care of all of this extra batting and get this seam to lay flat. So the very first step is to press the seam allowance open. So I'm going to finger press first. I'm just kind of getting my fingernail in there and running it down the length. And I think it's perfectly fine to press your seam allowances open. I did piece with a short stitch length. I changed the stitch length on my machine to 1.5 millimeters. Okay, I'm going to grab a pressing cloth here and place that over that seam. And that's just going to protect that batting. I am using polyester batting, but I found different types of batting can be sensitive to heat. So it's always good to use a pressing cloth just in case. There we go. So now that is nice and flat. Now I can fold over my batting, and you can see we're going to get an overlap here, and we don't want that because an overlap, that's going to be extra bulky. It's going to kind of stand out and be extra puffy there right between the blocks. So what I'm going to do is just simply pull this back and just kind of guesstimate how much batting I need to cut away. It should be around 1/2 inch, but there we go. I'm just going to cut that off of one side, and you can see that looks nice. I've got a few gaps in there, but honestly, that's not a big deal. A gap would be better than an overlap. So don't worry about it if you get a little gappy. Okay, so I'm going to grab some Elmer's glue because you can see this can still float around. It can still, kind of go wonky on you. So I'm going to grab some Elmer's glue, and this is a micro tip glue bottle. You can find these on my website, leahday.com. And I'm just going to apply a little bit right along the edge. You want to control this. That's why you need the micro tip, because otherwise you'll get glue everywhere. It'll go through your fabric. It'll be a big mess. Just, gluing on batting in general is a big mess, as you can see. So go gently and slowly and carefully and just press that down. And then I'm also going to run a line of glue on the other side. And you could put this directly on the fabric. I just found that it stuck a little bit better whenever I applied it to the batting. But experiment with that, see what works best for you, of course. There we go. Press that down. And again, I'm going to grab a pressing cloth and give that a little press with my iron. And I am using a hot, dry iron here. Now I pull that pressing cloth away, and you can see, yeah, my batting is definitely getting a little melty in places, so just watch out for that. This might be a call for a cotton batting if you want to use that. You could also use wool. Definitely play around with it, just see what works. And you can use other materials in the middle too, like flannel. That would work well too. There we go. So that is how we're going to prep up all of those seams, just pressing that seam allowance open, trimming that extra batting away, and then gluing down the batting so it forms just one continuous flat surface. You can see I've already done that here and down here. And like I said, it's okay if you accidentally trim a bit much and you get a little gappy. That's better than an overlap. So I'm going to finish up trimming up the seam, and then we're going to put a back on our wall hanging so it can be used on the wall. So here's another version of the Chakra wall hanging that we're making in the exact same way. You can see I cut this one down and had the blocks be a lot smaller with no extra space on the outside edges. And here's what the back is going to look like. You can see we're going to attach a piece of backing fabric that's going to pull the edges of the embroideries over to the other side. That's going to finish that edge nicely. And then doing a little bit of stitching in the ditch will stabilize everything so your wall hanging will hang really nicely. And we also have a little hanging sleeve here so that way you can hang it on the wall. Okay, so a couple things that we need to prep up. We need to prep up the backing fabric. So what you'll do is just spread out your wall hanging on a piece of starched and pressed fabric. You want it to be nice and stiff and stable. So spread this out and cut a piece of fabric that's exactly that size. So that's what I've done here. Now for the hanging sleeve, I decided to go on ahead and attach this now because once I turn the quilt right side out, that pretty much, other than some stitching in the ditch, it will be done. So how I made this hanging sleeve is I took a 5-inch wide by 9-inch long strip of fabric. I turned those edges under twice and edge stitched along that second fold so that way I have all my raw edges taken care of. And then I took the 2 short ends and lined them up along the top edge of this backing fabric. I then pushed it up ever so slightly, just creating, you can see, just a little bit of extra space there. So if you put this on a rod or something thick, it's not going to cause the front of your wall hanging to bulge outward. You want to just give yourself a little bit of space there. And all I did to do that was I just slid the fabric forward slightly, and then I stitched right along the edge of that fold. So very, very simple to make that little hanging sleeve. Now, of course, because I've already attached the hanging sleeve, I want to make sure that I place this on the quilt properly so it not only ends up on the right end of the quilt, it also ends up on the right side. So we're going to place this so that hanging sleeve side down, that's going to be the right side down on top of the wall hanging right side up. And we're making sure that the hanging sleeve is lined up with the end with the white or crown chakra. That's the top of the quilt. There we go. So lining that up nicely, and I'm just kind of squishing the extra, fluffy bit of that hanging sleeve further down into the quilt, and that's going to work just fine. And now I'm just going to take some Wonder Clips and clip around and just line this up nicely. And we're going to stitch around this, leaving a space open. And I like to leave pretty much about a 4-inch space open. So I stitch over that seam and I stitch over that seam, so those seams are taken care of, but I leave all that space open so that way it's easy to turn. So I'm going to clip this and we'll take it to the machine and stitch it together. So I'm going to get started stitching here right between the blue and green. Definitely remember to back stitch right there at the beginning, so that way you can easily turn and you won't have to worry about your stitches coming loose. Okay, so the main thing here is just to double check your seams. And it's nice if your needle ends in the down position, so you can kind of tug on the fabric a little bit and wiggle it around if you need to. And that's looking good. I'm just making sure the edges of those fabrics are in nice alignment. And I am using my 1/4-inch patchwork foot, so that way I can stitch a nice accurate seam. Now I have bumped up my stitch length to 2 millimeters because I'm going through 2 layers of fabric plus the batting, and I don't want the foot to get hung up on anything, so that's why I've chosen a slightly longer stitch length. But after you're finished stitching this, you can go all the way around the edge. You can do some edge stitching. So definitely feel like you can do some more embellishment and add more security if you want to. Okay, so I'm just lining this up, stitching on down, and you can see just how easy this is. Pillowcase binds are really nice because it allows you to cover up a messy back. Like let's say you had a mistake or an issue in your embroidery, or even if you did free motion quilting for these squares, if they turned out a little bit messy on the back, well, this would completely cover it up. No one would be able to tell. Now, what you might find is even if you measure and cut a really accurate backing fabric, sometimes as you're stitching, one thing or the other can kind of stretch out of shape. So if your backing fabric doesn't turn out exactly the right size, don't worry about it. I'm just going to get close to it. Looks like I'm about 1/8 of an inch off. That's not a big deal. I am going to go off of the edge of the embroideries, not the backing here. So I'm just going to slide this down and try and get that as even as I can. That looks good. It looks like I overshot it 1 stitch, so I'm going to back up a stitch, lift the foot, just like so. Now some machines don't like backing up a stitch, so watch out for that. Some machines really gag and hate it, so watch out for that. But I found that on this machine at least, I can back up 1 stitch by rotating the hand wheel away from me, and that allows me to back up so I don't overstitch a seam. Here we go. Now I'm going to turn the corner again, so it's needle in the down position, lift the foot, rotate the quilt around, just like so. Okay, so I'm going to continue stitching down this seam, and I'll meet you back here when we're ready to finish it off and give it a turn. So now that I've stitched around that backing fabric, I'm just giving the corners a bit of a trim. And you can get real nitpicky about this. You could go around the entire thing and trim the seams down. You could trim the batting away by pulling that fabric back and just trimming the batting. It's really up to you how far you want to go with this and how much of a hurry you're in. This is a really nice quick project. You could probably go start to finish in a matter of hours, but devil's in the details. It depends on how much you want to get nitpicky when it comes to trimming this up. So I'm just going to lop off the corners a bit here. You can see I just trimmed that nice and close all the way around the corner, and then give that little nip a little closer to that stitching. I'm being careful not to go too close. You don't want to blow that out as you're turning it. I do think it's going to help to trim the batting just a little bit when that area that we left open. So I'm just going to trim that back just a bit more. That looks good. And whenever I went around my chakra wall hanging, I started here, I back stitched, I went all the way around and then back stitched here. Like I said, this is called a pillowcase bind for a reason. It's like a pillowcase. You stitch around it and then you're able to turn it right side out. So here we go. I'm going to get my thumbs in here and get all the way down to that corner. I'm going to turn that corner inside out. Do the same thing with the opposite one. I just grab a hold of it, stick a finger on it, and then turn it right side out. Okay, so now I'm going to worm my way back through. I'm just kind of sticking my hand through there, turning it inside out, just like so. And then now I've reached that opening, I can grab those corners and start to pull. There we go. Once you get it going, it really turns right side out pretty quickly. Now you want to take a point turner, some kind of blunt object. You can also just simply take a pen. And what I do is I just grab a hold of the little fold there and just poke at it a little bit. I kind of stick the tip of the pen in and wiggle it back and forth, and that will generally bring that corner out. Now you want to be careful. This can also cause the fabric to fray and go a little weird too, so just be gentle. I'm going to stick the tip of the needle in, wiggle it around. I stick the tip of the needle in again, wiggle it around, and I'm happy with that. That is a really nice, oops, sorry. That is a really nice corner turn right there. They're not going to be super, super sharp. They're going to be slightly rounded because, of course, they're still batting in that corner. So that's why you're going to always have a very subtle curve there. Okay, so now I'll try that on the other side. Got to turn this side right side out. Might want to do the same thing. Stick my fingers through the middle, come all the way to the end, turn those corners right side out. I can actually go straight through the hole just like that. There we go. Looks good. Looks good. And it's just a little bit of a fiddly process, and I've got that hanging sleeve there too. That looks great. I'm so happy with that hanging sleeve. That makes me happy because I didn't have to do any extra stitching. You know, usually a hanging sleeve you have to do some extra hand stitching and stuff, and that's always a pain. So it's really nice to just already have it attached. Now, of course, I'm taking a look at it and I'm realizing I actually think I left too much fabric sticking up here. You can see if you stuck the hanging sleeve there, it's going to extend off the top a bit. So, little mistake I made, but hey, I think it still looks good. You know, it's one of those things. Sometimes as I'm trying something new, and this is the first time I've tried putting the hanging sleeve on with the backing fabric before the backing fabric was attached. And now I've learned you can't really do it that way. You have to pull that down and have a flat hanging sleeve just simply for this style of binding, because usually when you have regular binding, you know, you have that extra edge, and that's what I was banking on, and I didn't even think about, oh, this is going to be a flat edge. Where you stitch is where the quilt ends. You don't have that extra quarter or half inch of border around it because we didn't do a traditional, binding fabric the whole 9 yards. So that's interesting. Okay. So how would I fix this? Super easy fix. All I have to do is rip out that line of stitching, pull this piece of fabric back down nice and flat, and then hand stitch along it. That'll be fixed. No big deal. Okay, so now what do? I want to go all the way around, and what I like to do is just kind of flatten it out, and it's more or less almost like finger pressing that seam. You're flattening out that seam so that you actually see the stitches on the side. So that way you don't end up with a place where it's like the fabric is folded and the seam is down in there. That would create a wobbly edge. You really want to roll that back and forth in your fingers and expose that stitching so it's right on the edge. That's the edge of your wall hanging. Just like so. Go all the way around. Use an iron. That'll definitely help. Give it a nice press. And then coming around this side, we have our opening. So here what we want to do is we want to just kind of pull on it ever so slightly, and that's going to immediately start tucking that backing fabric in. And what we want to do is we want to get a nice fold going for that backing fabric, and then that's going to help us match up with where the front fabric should be. So you can see I fold that over, kind of eyeball it, see where it's at, And then I'm tucking that other edge in, because what I don't want to do, I don't want to have a nice smooth straight edge and then like a wobble out or a wobble in. So that's the thing to watch out for. And it's just a matter of playing around with the fabric, tweaking it, getting it just right. Maybe, move it to a pressing board, give it a little press with your iron. But already, actually, that's looking pretty good. I'm pretty pleased with that. So the next stage, what I would do next is edge stitch all the way around it. That's going to give you a nice stable edge. It's not going to, kind of go that number on you. That would create a nice quilted effect. And then also run through and stitch in the ditch between each block. That's also going to stabilize the backing fabric so it forms one nice solid layer all the way through the quilt. So that's it. That's the Chakra wall hanging and a new way to quilt as you go with beautiful embroidered quilt blocks. So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed making this beautiful Chakra wall hanging with me. So these designs are just a little bit different from the designs I shared in the original Chakra wall hanging, and they are all included in the Elemental Energies embroidery collection. You can find that at leahday.com/energy. So come and check it out. You'll find all of these beautiful designs, 25 total, and you can mix and match to create a unique Chakra wall hanging just for you. And you can see there's so many different ways to play around with this and create a really creative wall hanging. You could vary how wide the blocks are. You could do 4 patches of each chakra, but really it's something fun to play with, and I hope that you give this a try and will send me a picture if you make one. Come and find the Elemental Energies embroidery collection at leahday.com/energy. Until next time, let's go quilt.